We were booked to have our foundation discussion with the Chief Executive of Cricket Victoria, Nick Cummins, today. Nick, thanks for keeping the appointment. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me. I think the context has changed a bit since we put that in.
It has. So we'll talk Victorian cricket shortly, but let's deal with what's before us first. Was the no-fault finding in the Tim Paine investigation a confected outcome to protect the Australian cricket captain that would never hold up in the public glare if the circumstances were before us?
I don't think so. I think that the process that Cricket Australia Integrity undertook at the time was bulletproof. Sean Carroll, who led the process, for those that know him, he's a highly experienced integrity professional and someone that you never enjoy dealing with because you know he's going to follow the letter of the law irrespective of how it may look in the media. And no, we were really satisfied that that was done the right way.
As you look back now with the benefit of hindsight, do you think Payne was guilty of a breach of a code of conduct, or do you still believe in the findings of the day?
I still believe in the findings of the day. The code of conduct, and it is CA's code of conduct, so I'm obviously commenting it from outside CA, found that he wasn't in breach. And I think it's important to stress that when you go through these things, and I certainly know that Sean did, that you always do it under the assumption that it will get out. So you have to be able to stand next to that decision in moments like now and justify it. And I justify it all the time.
Were you surprised then that the current Cricket Australia administration took the opposite view, that they believed, presented with the same circumstances, they would reach the opposite finding?
Look, I wasn't part of the conversations, the deliberations of the CA board when we've discussed it. I don't know whether they have access to all the information that we did at the time. And I think there's also, there's decisions in cold blood and there's decisions in warm blood. So often, 3 years down the track, you're making decisions in cold blood, and you can be a lot more dispassionate, perhaps, than when you're right in the centre of it, and you've got access to all the information, but also the context and when you're making that decision. So, look, I can't comment specifically about how they arrived at that decision, but it's certainly not the decision we arrived at the time.
When the complaint was first lodged, Tim Paine has become the Australian captain and it's lodged with you. How aware of the magnitude of it are you in the moment that it's before you?
Oh, absolutely aware. Obviously, and you said this yesterday in your comments, that when he did what he did, which he, by his own admission, was idiotic, but certainly we all thought that at the time. He had no idea that he would become Australian captain. But when we found out what he did, he was. And it was just off the back of Cape Town as well. So the reputation of Australian cricket was pretty brittle at the time. So the magnitude was significant. And when I first heard it, your first reaction is disbelief. And indeed, when I called him, I expected him to kind of laugh it off. And I guess to his credit, he owned up straight away. And my heart sank, and then you sort of immediately switch into management mode and think, right, well, we've got to get on and manage this now.
When you first had that phone call, did you think, I don't know how this ends. I don't know. Does this cost Tim the Australian captaincy today, tomorrow, one day down the track?
This will sound like a bit of a cop-out, but because of the arrangement of contract, he was a CA employee at that time, so we had to refer it to Cricket Australia, and that immediately becomes Cricket Australia's problem. But you do wonder, I was probably more worried for him as a person. I mean, being the captain of the Australian cricket team is really important, but his marriage, his relationship with his friends and family is far more important. So that's probably where you worry first about, geez, this is really embarrassing. It's an error in judgment, and how do you work through that? Because they're the people that really matter. And I think actually being captain of Australia is second to that.
Was there any reason to have concerns around Tim's previous conduct when he graduated to the Australian captaincy?
No, I don't think so. And I think, the challenge is that I think he needs to be assessed on how he performed as Australian captain. It's kind of how far do you go back and how deep do you go in people's backgrounds and maybe what they've done previously. He's we can't hold people to impossible standards. I think we have an expectation of how people behave when they're in a role, but there's also an element of double jeopardy here where if someone has been held responsible or done something in a previous role, do they have to relive that again in their new role?
What did Cricket Tasmania do? It was your former employee who made the complaint against a Well, he's contracted to Cricket Australia. He is a Cricket Tasmania person as well.
Yeah, so the former employee made a range of complaints, and Tim was just part of that. So we referred the Tim Payne part of that immediately to Cricket Australia, and the other part of the complaint we handled as it related to Cricket Tasmania issues.
Well, is one of the outcome of those that a second person was, a person was dismissed from Cricket Tasmania as a result?
A second person resigned.
So Shannon Tubb.
Yeah, resigned as a result of that, yes.
Yep. So was he facing the same allegation of behaviour as Tim Payne did?
The details, there's with employment law, if someone resigns, there's confidentiality, but the circumstances and the detail were different. There were some similarities, but if we put them next to each other, they're quite different circumstances. So consequently, the penalty, the view that Cricket Tasmania took was quite different to what we would have taken with Tim's, irrespective of the profile of the two. But also, the roles that each of them had actually matter in terms of, what their behaviour and how that applies to any penalty.
So as a like for like, and this is the question being asked from the outside, was Tim Payne given preferable treatment to Shannon Tubb because of his status within cricket?
No, not at all. And this is unfortunately situations because you are bound by confidentiality, but I'm sure as a pub test, if you sat down and put the two next to each other, someone would see that they are quite different in terms of their nature, and that it's reasonable to form a different view on the two individuals.
Did you conclude that you had a cultural issue within Cricket Tasmania as a result of these complaints?
Look, no, I don't think so. Not as a result of this sort of behaviour. I don't think, or I don't believe, and I certainly didn't see that this behaviour was widespread. I think that Cricket Tasmania at the time had gone through a transition period where maybe Tim Coyle's strong leadership had really set a standard, and when he departed, probably slid back a bit, and that was evident in the terms of the performance of Tasmanian teams at the time. But Andrew Gagan, who was the chairman then and remains so now, was determined to return them to the Coyle glory years, and that requires challenging people around their professional standards. But in terms of behavioural issues and cultural issues in that regard, no, I didn't think this was endemic of a broader issue.
Does Cricket Tasmania make a finding in the Tim Payne case? So the release that came on Friday, is that as a result of the work that was done by Cricket Australia, or does Cricket Tasmania reach its own conclusion?
Cricket Australia. So again, it sounds like employment law discussion, but Tim wasn't an employee of Cricket Tasmania at the time. So that was Cricket Australia's integrity unit that made that finding.
Did you work on the assumption that this would all be one day on the front pages of the paper?
Always. So anytime we have situations like this where, maybe there's a player behaviour issue or even just a staff member, given the level of interest, and you've seen this in your show over the last 48 hours that cricket has, we're part of Australia's sort of cultural fabric, you have to assume that one day you'll be sitting here like this talking about what happens. And so you make all the decisions based on that. You have to have a bulletproof process that will stand up to scrutiny. And it can be challenging sometimes doing that, but it's always a really good filter to apply when you're making your decisions.
Did you hold any view publicly or privately at the time that it should have been put into the public domain to avoid this day, 3.5 years down the track, that there was a way to deal with it? And it would have still been embarrassing, and it would have been very difficult for Cricket Australia to navigate with the man they just put into the job. But if there is a no fault finding for him, that it might have been dealt with at the time.
I think the challenge with that is if something up until that point has been confidential and you come out and announce that nothing has happened, that immediately triggers a certain percentage of the media or the public to say, well, something surely did. Quite frequently, and in fact, recently, CA Integrity has found no fault with different player behaviour or staff behaviour, and broadcasting, that no one has been found guilty of something that people didn't know about, I think is a breach of privacy. I think that people are entitled, and this applies to your listeners as well, is that we've all got rights that need to be protected in terms of privacy. And so broadcasting that someone hasn't done something wrong almost triggers questions about, well, have they really not done something wrong? I now want to play bush lawyer and prosecute that case myself. So I think it's entirely reasonable, and it is CA Integrity's policy always not to to broadcast or publicise if no fault is found. If fault is found, they will.
Do you think Tim Payne could still be an Australian captain today? You think he should still be Australian captain today?
I think that's Cricket Australia's decision. I wouldn't be happy if Cricket Australia were commenting on who should be captain of Cricket Victoria.
Yep. Have you had contact with Tim in the last few days?
I haven't. Usually it sounds like I do this stuff all the time, but when this kind of thing happens, I sort of give them a bit of time to breathe, but I'll talk to him in the next week or so. He and I have been on this journey together from the start, and as you would have seen in some reports, it's been inevitable that it would come out, and so we've been in close contact all the way along. And I'd just say that no one excuses his behaviour. It was completely inappropriate, and even to this day, I'm not sure why he did it. I don't think he does either. But I do think that he's had 3.5 years to show that he's a good husband and a good person, and he's been able to do that with Bonnie, and I think that he's been exemplary. And people deserve an opportunity for atonement or redemption, and I think he deserves that.
Is there a source of lament that his time serving Australian cricket ends in what on Friday were humiliating circumstances?
Oh, absolutely. If you think about the way that he rose to the job, he sort of got a bonus 4 years of his career. I mean, I spoke to him in a cafe in Tasmania when I first started and convinced him not to take the job at Kookaburra, not thinking that because I wanted to be captain of Australia, but just because we needed some leadership as we made this transition to the next sort of post-Bailey, post-Payne phase. And then to sort of see the journey that he went on, for it to end this way is unjust and just, lamentable, I think is the right word, yeah.
Do you feel like the system has failed him?
I feel that with these sorts of issues, there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of detail which is starting to come out, and there'll be more that will come out, that sometimes in order to make judgments, you need to have full 360 view of what's going on. And I just ask your listeners not to immediately jump to conclusions with the sort of first line of the first story and go, oh, well, he's clearly guilty or he's clearly innocent. But unfortunately, we won't be able to do that until in time, I guess, all of the detail comes out. And that's hard, because I think the way that society works at the moment is that people are very quick to judge, all people, employers, employees, listeners, media, and it doesn't give a lot of room for stories to breathe and evolve.
The second part of this story, the second party in this story, is extremely difficult to discuss because of ongoing legal matters. So I acknowledge that, and it is a gap in some of what's been said, and it does lead to some of the comments around victim blaming and the like. So I'll just ask this question. Do you feel like, did Cricket Tasmania under your leadership fail that employee?
Absolutely not. I would say, and you're right, the matter's before the courts, so I can't comment, but I would broadly say that, and this applies to Tim, we, Cricket Tasmania, Cricket Victoria, Cricket Australia, we're a business, we're a professional environment. That kind of behaviour isn't acceptable. We found that was consensual, that behaviour. It's still not acceptable. If you want to do that in your personal life, you can, but if you're doing it with a work colleague, it is still regarded as work. So, we've got to hold ourselves to standards and operate as professionals, but no, we did not fail an employee. And again, unfortunately, I can't go into a lot of detail except to say that we investigated thoroughly. I mean, our concern was sexual harassment. That was investigated and prosecuted thoroughly to ensure that wasn't the case, because that's a very, very serious, and it's never been acceptable. But in the last 5 years, women particularly have made it clear that they're fed up with banter. So we looked through the lens that way. There's no tolerance of that, but we are satisfied that it wasn't sexual harassment.
Nick Cummins, who was the Chief Executive of Cricket Tasmania, with the story that has dominated cricket over the past 4 or 5 days. His current job is as the Chief Executive of Cricket Victoria, and that is where we will explore next.